Okay, all set, Tina.
All right. Good evening and welcome to our monthly Near Death Experience Support Group meeting. We welcome family members, seekers, and students of the NDE. My name is Tina Angeli. I'm a near death experiencer, and I'm also one of the facilitators of this group for over 20 years. I also interview all speakers and ensure that they are suitable to speak for our group. Dr. Bethany Silver and I spend numerous hours making this group the successful group that it is. Anyone that wishes to become a working facilitator of the group and donate significant time to assist in technical and or other administrative tasks for our group should contact us. This evening's speaker is Brian Smith. Brian, thank you for accepting our invitation to speak for our group this evening. We look forward to hearing your story soon. To allow individuals enough time to ask the questions, there will be one question limit per attendee until everyone with questions has had an opportunity to be heard. This meeting will conclude promptly at 8:30. Anyone wishing to continue to share with other attendees may remain. We ask that all attendees mute your audio, and when Brian concludes his sharing, he will be open to answer questions. Thank you, Brian. Please begin.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you for having me here today. I'm going to jump right into the presentation because instead of telling you who I am, because you're going to find out when I do the presentation. So let me start by sharing my screen. Let me find the right window. Window. And where is it? There it is. Share. All right. So you guys see my presentation? It's still coming up, it looks like. All right. So do you see it?
Yes.
All right. Good deal. All right. Excuse me. What I'm going to talk about today is how I went from grief to growth and how you can too. So I start off by telling the beginning of a short story. So go back about 20, see, Kayla's 27 now, so 26 years. I have my daughter, Kayla. She's 9 months old. I was living in Lexington, Kentucky at the time. I was working for Sun Microsystems. So my wife is staying home. We just have our first child. And something happens at work. I get a call and I get fired from my job. So I'm fired from my job. I've got a 9-month-old kid at home. My wife's staying at home for the first time. And that's the beginning of the story. So keep that in mind. At the end, I'm going to conclude the story and let you know what the reason why I told you that. So today we're going to talk about my background a little bit. We're going to talk about the problem that we have with death and facing death. We're going to talk about the evidence for what I believe about the afterlife. I never ask anybody to believe anything just based on my word. I'm a very evidence-based person. My background is engineering. I'm a chemical engineer by training. So I'm going to talk to you about evidence. I'm going to talk to you about 2 different ways of viewing life and death. I'll talk about a decision point in my life. I'll talk about a 3rd way of viewing life and death. I'll talk about a 2nd decision point in my life. What inspires me to do what I do. Why I believe we misunderstand who we are, why we're here, where we're going. I'm going to give you 2 new ways of viewing things. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what is grief and grief practice and some grief tools. I'm going to try to move through this pretty quickly and leave time for questions at the end. So let me get started here. So my objective is to help you understand who you are, why you're here, where you come from, and where you're going. Now, when I speak to groups, a lot of times I'm speaking to people who don't have any clue about this, but now that you guys are all part of IANDS, a lot of you are near-death experiences, you probably have a pretty good idea about this. But for other people, and maybe to reinforce what you already believe, I believe this viewpoint can change your life. So going back to my beginnings, as a child, I was terrified of death. I would say to the point of where I had thanatophobia, where it was debilitating. I used to have panic attacks. I would not be able to sleep at night. I was raised in a background of a religion that told me that there was a God that was going to judge me, a God who already judged me, a God I was already an enemy of. So this made me terrified of death. And it was something that was with me throughout my childhood. I was taught a traditional view of heaven and hell. And I call it traditional because it was for me. I was taught that there was a binary thing that was going to happen when we die. We go to heaven and we're rewarded for eternity, or we go to hell and we're tormented for eternity. And I was terrified of the second thing because of the God that I was told that was this judgmental God. My grandfather was my pastor, and I love my grandfather. I respect him. I love him to this day. But I grew up in a Pentecostal church, and they taught this in the church that I grew up in. So it was deeply ingrained in me, and I really felt like I had no choice but to believe it when you're a child and you're being told that this is what the truth is. Moving back to our society, and the reason why I think this problem is widespread is death is a stranger in our society. We hide it away. When people are ill, we put them, people don't die at home much anymore. I think that's starting to come back a little bit. But when people do pass away, some people never see a dead body, for example. And I remember my father, his older brother passed away. And during his time, they would lay the bodies out at home, and people would see that. Children that grew up on farms would see, life and death, animals coming and going. But we don't see that in our society a lot of times. We do try to avoid death at all costs. We have a very youth-oriented culture where we try to cheat death. We get Botox injections. We get face plastic surgery. We get hair transplants. We do anything we can to maintain youth because aging reminds us that our bodies are not going to be here forever. We have very preconceived notions of when people should die. And I'm going to talk about this in my case. The reason why I'm speaking today is because my 15-year-old daughter passed away. But we think that, everybody should live to be 80 or 90 or 100, and we should all die in this certain order. Again, going back a little bit in society, when children used to pass all the time from accidents or illness, it was not uncommon if people had 5 or 6 or 7 children, they might lose 1 or 2 of them, before they became adults. But now we think that, that's the people should die in a certain order. And we don't have any real knowledge of the afterlife. We live in such a materialistic society, so scientifically oriented, that we say, well, anything that we can't measure cannot be true. It can't even exist. And to the point where we have philosophers that are running around today telling us that consciousness is an illusion. So the one thing that we know more than anything, we have people saying that it's an illusion. So we don't have any knowledge of the afterlife. And that's something that we all know at some level, even as much as we try to avoid it, that we're going there someday. It creates a sense of fear. And we see death as the ultimate failure. We see death as the end. Doctors will do anything they can to prolong life, again, at all costs. Literally costs of people's physical health or physical well-being, that we will maintain a body for as long as we can, and the cost of money. We spend, I forget what percentage of our budget, but it's like 20 or 30% of our medical budget on end-of-life care, or we're trying to just keep people alive for a few more days or weeks or hours. So for me, as I said, I was raised in this religious home, but science and math really made sense to me. I like to take things apart. I like to know how things work. I literally would take things apart, and sometimes I got in trouble for that because I took things apart that were working, but I wanted to see inside and see how they worked. So I thought, well, maybe there's answers in science. Maybe study in the natural world can tell me something about what's really going on. So what I'd like to do now is I want to make the case of what I believe. So there are 3 ways to know that an afterlife exists, basically 3 categories of evidence. There's direct evidence or experience. There's something that we experience ourselves or something that someone else might experience. For example, like a near-death event. Someone can have a near-death event. That's a direct evidence experience of life going on afterwards. There's scientific evidence. We can study science, we can study data, now a lot of these things don't lend themselves well to be studied in the lab. We can't kill people and see their souls leave their bodies, for example, but there are ways that we can study scientifically, and some of that's being done, and definitely more than most people realize. And then there are also philosophical arguments. You can use logic and reasoning to come to a lot of the conclusions that we talk about. And I'm going to talk to you about some philosophical ways of looking at life. And I was Just interviewing someone earlier today, we were talking about metaphysics, and this guy's an electrical engineer, but he's like, there's something beyond the material as well, and we can actually come to that conclusion with logic. So the NDE, the near-death experience, for me, of all the studying I've done, this is a huge body of evidence. Literally millions, probably billions of people have had an NDE, and I don't think that's an exaggeration. There are about 7.5 billion people on the planet right now, and somewhere between 5 and 10% of people have an NDE. So if you just do the math, and that's just people living the day, there are probably billions of people who have had this experience. When you talk to someone who's had a near-death experience, they say that the afterlife is, quote, realer than real. They are convinced. They're like, this is the dream. That's the real world. Research shows that NDEs happen to a representative population. Some people think it's wishful thinking. Well, no, it happens to atheists. It happens to people who don't believe in the afterlife at all. They happen to Christians. They happen to Hindus. They happen to Muslims. They happen to men. They happen to women. They happen to old people. They happen to young people. So it's a very representative population that has this experience. And again, as I said, tens of millions of people have had it. And there's so many similarities to the things that they describe that it makes sense that there's something behind that. So again, direct evidence or experience of the afterlife is one way we can experience. And I talked about some of those things like NDEs, things like out-of-body experiences, the dream visitations, etc. Things that we experience ourselves is a good way to get in touch with the afterlife. And then there's subjective versus objective. Now, it's really interesting, people that are very much scientifically oriented, which I am scientifically oriented, will say, well, science is objective. When you talk about an NDE or if you experience something yourself, that's a subjective experience. We can't put weight in subjective experiences. But I would argue that everything is a subjective experience. Even when a scientist is in his lab and he's doing an experiment and he's observing something, right? But it's his subjective experience. He's reading the instruments. He's looking at something. He's reporting it. So he's reporting his subjective experience, and we're taking it as objective reality because it's a scientist saying it. So why do we give them so much more credence than we do someone, for example, that had a near-death experience that reports their experience? So I think that objective is absolutely great, but I don't think we should dismiss subjective experiences as well. When it comes to scientific evidence, as I talked a lot about near-death experience, their after-death communications, their reincarnation memories in children. Dr. Ian Stevenson at the University of Virginia and Dr. Jim Tucker following him have studied thousands of children that have memories of being big, as they would say a lot of times. I remember when I was big and I flew an airplane in the war, or I remember when I was big and I was an actor in Hollywood. There is some amount of laboratory mediumship research. Dr. Julie Beischel does that. Dr. Gary Schwartz does laboratory research on mediumship, and it is shown that mediumship is a very real phenomena. And there's laboratory technology research. Gary Schwartz is doing research with the afterlife in the lab. Sonia Rinaldi does research with the afterlife in the lab. So what's really interesting to me is a lot of times when you're speaking with people, they'll say there's no evidence of any of this stuff. And I've talked to people and I would start to say, well, look up the work of Dr. Penny Sartori, for example. Look up the work of Julie Beischel or Gary Schwartz or whatever. And then they come back to me and like, why didn't I know any of this existed? But it does. It's out there. There's philosophical reasoning. I'll give you a couple of examples. One is a guy that I admire a lot. I've read a lot of what he's written. His name is Dr. Bernardo Kastrup. He's a PhD in computer science. He's also got a PhD in philosophy. He's a brilliant guy, and he espouses this philosophy called idealism, which says that consciousness is fundamental and that the physical world arises from that. And I'll get more into that later. There's a great book I read by a guy named Jens Amberts, I believe his name is pronounced. And it's a thought experiment that basically philosophically proves that NDEs prove the afterlife exists. A fascinating book because he takes the evidence from NDEs and he uses that to prove, again, in a philosophical way, that the afterlife exists. So there's also some implications about an afterlife or a connection to consciousness through quantum mechanics. And you've all heard about things like the double slit experiment, and we've heard about entanglement. And this really blows the material away because it defies the known laws of physics. and it makes them realize there may be something beyond what we understand. So when it comes to understanding things, there are a couple of principles that scientists say they keep in mind. One is parsimony, and the other is Occam's razor. And they're basically two ways of saying the same thing. And what they're saying is basically, if you have a couple of explanations for something, the simplest one is probably the most likely. And we really should look for the most simple explanation as opposed to getting all complicated with things. Well, it's interesting when it comes to, say, for example, the origins of the universe. They will come up with all kinds of theories to not say that consciousness created the universe. For example, they'll say, well, there's an infinite number of universes. So the one that we have that is so fine-tuned and looks like it's here to support life, the reason why that happened is it's random chance, and it's not 1 in a billion, but there's billions and billions of universes. And that may or may not be true, but there's no scientific evidence of it. So it just shows you how far sometimes people will go to hold on to that materialism. What happened? There we go. So let's talk about two ways of viewing life and death. So there's religion and there's materialism. So religion, the great thing about religion, even though it has some shortcomings, it does give us a life of meaning. It does tell us who we are, why we're here, where we're going, all those really important questions. But it also comes a lot of times with judgment. It comes with rules, and a lot of times those rules are totally made up and don't make a lot of sense. On the other hand, we have materialism, or atheistic materialism, as I like to call it. So that basically says life is meaningless. It's random. There's no meaning behind why we're here. The universe popped into existence. This thing called evolution just happened. Something happened, and at some point we became conscious. But our life is accidental, and death is the end. When your body is born, when you take your first breath, that's when you come alive. You take your last breath, that's when you end, and it's over. So the thing they have in common is between these traditional religions and atheism and materialism is they're both very dogmatic. They're both very authoritarian. They don't like anything outside of the rules. They're very rigid. They think they know it all. They have a very narrow-minded and controlling view. So I always kind of smile when atheists or materialistic atheists tell me that they don't have any dogma. If you talk to them for long enough, you'll find that they very, very much do have dogma. And they very, very much tell you things like, well, mediumship isn't possible. Precognition is not possible. Other things that I happen to believe in, they'll tell you they're not possible. Well, that's a philosophical understanding. That's not a scientific point of view. Now, there's a third option, and that's spirituality, or as I was interviewing this gentleman this morning, he called it metaphysics. So meta means going beyond. So it's going beyond the physical. So science is great. Love science. Studying the physical universe has gotten us a lot. But when we limit ourselves to what we can measure with our instruments, we're missing the vast majority. And I believe we're missing the actual foundations. So metaphysics gets into all that stuff. So when it comes to religion, again, religion, I believe, is kind of a subset of spirituality. It's the traditions of man. It's based on scriptures. It's passed down. It's got rules. It's binding. Religion actually comes from the Latin word, which means to tie, or to fast together. Spirituality encourages you more to trust on your experience. It encourages you to explore, and encourages you to, again, to trust yourself. And spirituality or metaphysics can be freeing. So for me, I grew up in a very religious environment, which I found to be very binding. I still love, there's a lot of great things about the Bible. There's a lot of great things about Christianity. But to me, it's just too small. It's too narrow. And as I've grown and I've studied Hinduism and Buddhism and et cetera, and science, that gives me I feel like a more complete view of the world. When it comes to religion, a lot of times they'll tell us that we're dirty. They'll tell us that we're broken. They'll tell us that we're far away from God. They'll tell us that we're guilty. And they'll tell us that we're actually worthless. And so I saw this, and it said, you're not too dirty for God to cleanse. You're not too broken for God to fix. And I tried to fix this. You're not dirty. You're not broken. You're not far from God. You cannot be far from God. It's impossible. You're not guilty. We all make mistakes, but we're not judged for them. And you're certainly not worthless. So this is the message, again, I think we get from metaphysics. This is the message we get from the near-death experience. This is the message we get when we move beyond some religious bindings. So why do we misunderstand? Well, again, when I was growing up in the church, and I'm going to talk a lot about the tradition I was raised in. I know this is not all churches. This was mine. There's like two views of God. One is the Santa Claus God. That's the guy that says, if you're a good little boy or girl, you'll get gifts. You'll if your life is going well, that means you're doing good things. If your life is going poorly, it's your fault. When you die, if you do good things, then I'm going to reward you. If you die and you do bad things, you get a lump of coal. That's what I call the Santa Claus God. Then there's the angry God, and this is the God I grew up with as well. You are miserable. You are terrible. You were born in sin, and if you don't do these things, you're going to die in sin. And my love for you is conditional. It's conditional upon you saying, believing the right thing. These are false images of God, of course. This is just a small example, and this is from an actual sermon by Jonathan Edwards, and I think it was in the 1800s. He said, "The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath towards you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. He has a purer eyes to bear than to have you in his sight. You are 10,000 times so abominable in his eyes as the most venomous serpent is in ours. You have offended him infinitely more than ever a stubborn rebel did his prince. And it says nothing but his hands to hold you from falling into the fire at every moment." Now, this is extreme, and believe me, this sermon actually got a lot worse. I mean, he talks about the fact that the earth hates us, the sun doesn't want to shine on us. And this is the way that some people were raised in religion. This is some people have been taught about God. Now, I want you to contrast that with, this is a book by a friend of mine. Her name is Frances Key. This is a series of book called The Team. Imagine sitting on the floor with your head in the lap of the most compassionate being you can imagine. Imagine this being stroking your hair as you speak of your deep sense of remorse. Feel and accept the tenderness in this being's hands, and then imagine this being is you, holding you. Look into the eyes of this alternate self, that self that made the wiser choice in an alternative reality, and accept what she's extending to you. Not only does she offer you compassion, she's offering you the opportunity to merge with her, to become the very self that you wish you had been. This is a lesson I believe we learn when we study near-death experiences, when we study spirituality, Frankie, when she wrote these books, she channeled them from her mother, who had passed in the spirit and was sending this wisdom back to her. So to me, I don't know how you felt by those two passages, but they gave me very, very different feelings of who I am and where I'm going. So I told you I was going to tell you about the beginning of my grief journey. So I told you about the beginning of my trauma. I studied all these things, and I studied spirituality. I studied philosophy and different religions, et cetera. And I overcame my fear of death for the most part when I was in my 30s or 40s. When I was in my mid-50s, my 15-year-old daughter, Shayna, passed away suddenly in June of 2015. She was a very healthy, happy, fantastic, smart 15-year-old girl. She passed suddenly in her sleep. So she went to bed one night, June 23rd, and didn't wake up on June 24th. So that was the beginning of my grief journey. That was the beginning of when I had to say, okay, I have to take all this stuff that I've learned in theory, and how am I going to put it into practice? So my wife and I, remember a few days after Shayna passed, we were out. We'd gone out to lunch. It's maybe a month after she had passed, because my wife's birthday was a month after she passed. And we're driving, and we both said, look at all these people just walking around like the world is okay, like the world didn't change, like the world didn't stop. And for me, I wanted to illustrate this, like it was like the world was like this one day, and then it was like this the next day. All the color was drained out of my world. I thought, I will never recover from this. I don't want to ever recover from this. My daughter, how could this happen? And how could people keep going on like the world is okay? So, but the thing is, I have inspiration in my family. This is my daughter, Shayna, my other daughter, Kayla, and my wife. And I'm like, I believe in this concept of the team, which I'm going to talk more about later. It's like, I have teammates here that count on me. Kayla still needs me here. My wife, Twana, needs me here. So I'm like, and my daughter, Shayna, she's passed in the spirit, but she's a bigger part of my team now than she was when she was here. You'll see Shayna, I was pointing the wrong way, Shayna over my shoulder here, both literally and figuratively, because Shayna drives me to everything I do. I talk to Shayna every day. I was talking with the parent earlier today, and she said, is it okay for us to talk to our kids who have passed in the spirit? Are we going to hold them back, or are we bugging them? Aren't they busy? And I'm like, no, I talk to Shayna every day. So I went back to studying. I'd studied anyway. You know, it's funny. We lie in bed at night. My wife's reading her fiction, and I'm reading, you know, Gary Schwartz, afterlife studies, right? And I'm reading, you know, stuff like that. So I'm back to my studying, and I've doubled down on it in the 9 years it's been now since Shane has passed away. It'll be 9 years in June. So this is what I do all day, every day. I'm studying metaphysical stuff. I'm talking to people who had near-death experiences. I'm trying to understand, you know, what's going on. So what I've tried to impress upon people, and I work with clients that are in grief, and I try to shift their perspective, like I'm trying to convince you today, if you're not there yet. What if this is the beginning of the journey? What if this is not? We look at death as the end. Death is the end of our relationship with our loved one. In the old days, they would tell us to move on. You know, they're gone, move on. You need to just accept reality that they're gone. But what if we look at it as like, this is not the end for our loved one. This is the beginning. They have transitioned into a wonderful new existence beyond the physical that we're tied up in now. But what if this is also the beginning of the journey for you, for us who are left behind? And for me, when Shayna passed, it was the end of one relationship and the beginning of another relationship. But it's also the beginning of a new life for me. I mean, I look at my life literally as before she passed and after. And people that have lost children and other people in their families will tell you this. They're like, oh, was that before or after? Because everything centers around that event. So 2 new views of everything. These are 2, I believe, life-changing views for people. One is the view I mentioned earlier, that we are part of a team. And I'm going to talk more about what that means and why it's important. And the consciousness is everything. The consciousness is as fundamental as Max Planck said. Not that the material that the consciousness rose out of the material, that somehow magically this random explosion turned into this orderly principles that brought together consciousness. No, this is more like what actually religion tells us, is a consciousness created the material, and that we are all part of that consciousness. So 2 choices. Materialism, all there is what we can see and measure. Consciousness arises from the material. The body dies, consciousness dies. That's a natural conclusion, right? If our consciousness comes online when our brain develops enough, if our brain stops, naturally our consciousness dies. That's the end. Idealism says that consciousness is the foundation, that consciousness is the beginning, that the material is derivative. Our bodies, everything we see around us, is formed out of this consciousness, this cosmic soup, if you want to call it that. The consciousness never began. We think of things in our world as beginning and ending, but science has even come to the conclusion, like, we don't know what time is. We perceive time, but we don't know what it is. It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. You can only move forward. Theoretically, according to physics, it should be able to go either way. So consciousness never began. And it's funny because we talk about the Big Bang, and they'll say, well, at the Big Bang, time began. And so our brains naturally go, well, if time began, what was there before? Well, there is no logically. That's a paradox, right? What is there before there's time? But if consciousness never began, then consciousness never ends. That we are eternal. We are without beginning or end. So this idea of idealism is relatively new to me. But this idea of idealism predates materialism. And if you think about our ancient myths, they all start with consciousness. They all start with some being that's outside of our material universe. Hinduism is very, very close to idealism, this idea that there was this nothing, really, this no thing that wanted to know itself, that created the creation that we are. And there are all these ancient myths that are very, very similar that came up from different parts of the world, from cultures that didn't have contact with each other. And I believe those things are channeled from spirit. The idea of idealism is consciousness eternal. The consciousness is stepped into its creation. We have that, and again, a lot of these creation myths that, and we even have in the Christian creation, the Christian story, we have Jesus, who was with the Creator at the beginning, coming into his creation at some point. So it's a common theme across these faiths. I believe this idea of idealism is actually built into us. I think we know that we're eternal creatures very down deep inside, which is one of the reasons why we fear death, because materialism tells us that that's not true. And we've forgotten this idea of materialism. It's been driven out of us in a sense. We have an illusion of separation. Again, in this model that I'm talking about, there's a collective consciousness that creates everything, that creates the me, that creates the you, the other. And that collective consciousness, we perceive that we're separate, but in that illustration, you can see we're all connected. We're all made out of the same stuff. I believe that when we come into these bodies, our incarnated mind is a very small piece of who we are. And our full self, our real self, our true self is back home. The vast majority of us never incarnates. And that has some really interesting implications, because in one sense, and I've been told this by Frankie, who wrote the team books, my daughter and I are still together in spirit. Like, she's with me and I'm with her. It's just this small part of me that's incarnated here, concentrating in this world. This is the part that misses her, but we never are actually apart. So this is the idea that, again, this came from, I talked to my Hindu friend, and this is exactly what also idealism tells us, that there's this consciousness that differentiated itself. It says, to know myself, I have to have something else to know it against. So I need an other. So it creates all of these 7 billion of us. And we have this sense of ego, this sense of perception, and we have these limits. This like, my body extends here, and this is me, and that's you. But in this illustration, you'll notice in the middle, it's the same as the outside, because within us is that thing that created us, that spark of light, that spark. And that ego is what makes us feel separate. And that allows us to experience this world. It's not a bad thing. It allows us to experience this world, to experience this experiment that we're in. But the Hindus call this Maya, and the Maya is the illusion of the separate self. We're never truly a separate self. We're just having this experience for a while. And so I like, what's interesting as we've come along with technology, I think we've got more and more analogies that we can use that describe the spiritual world. And we have VR now, virtual reality. And if anyone ever played a VR game, you put on a headset, you're in a different world with a different set of rules. You perceive things through sensors. Maybe you have gloves on, you can feel things. You only see what's in the game. You only hear what's coming through the game. You can't perceive what's outside the game. So you could be standing in your living room playing the game, and your wife could be sitting on the couch, but you're in this world and you're interacting with it through an avatar, only through these 5 senses or whatever, and it's set up by the rules of the game. Now, it's an immersive reality, and while you're in it, it feels very real, but it's not the ultimate reality. And I believe this is a great analogy for what we're doing here. Our spirits have come into these bodies, and our spirits animate these bodies. And I can only experience this venue through these senses. They're very limited. But when I take off the VR headset, I can see the real world beyond that. And we see only a tiny fraction. We perceive only a tiny fraction of what exists. In terms of the light spectrum, we only see a tiny portion of it. Bees, for example, birds, see a very different world than we do, because they can see ultraviolet, for example. We hear only a small band of sound. There are creatures that can hear subsonic sounds and supersonic sounds for us. Your dog can hear things that you can't hear. Whales can hear things that we don't hear. Dogs have a sense of smell that's estimated to be 10,000 to 100,000 times better than ours. My dog goes out in the yard, and I'm like, what is she sniffing? It's because she has a whole different perception of the world. She knows who passed by. She knows what they were wearing. She knows what they had to eat the day before. It's a whole different world that she perceived than what I perceive. We live in a universe, and this is science. 68% of the universe is made up of dark matter. 27% of the universe is made up of dark energy. And nobody can tell you what dark matter or dark energy are. They can just tell you according to their equations that they exist. So think about it. We only perceive 5% of the universe. What is that other 95%? So there's some pictures this guy took. He's a photographer. And he took pictures of flowers the way that if you could see ultraviolet light, this is the way they would look. And when people have near-death experiences, what do they tell us? I heard sounds that I couldn't hear here. I saw colors that I couldn't see here. I believe these suits that we're wearing, they limit us from perceiving what's even around us. My loved one, Shayna's probably standing right next to me now. I just can't perceive her because she's at a different bandwidth. So this is just an illustration that we only see a small part of what's going on around us. The second thing I want to talk to you about, the second thing change I want to make is we're not alone. We're never alone. It feels like we're alone. We're supposed to feel like we're alone. I talked to a guy one time, and we were talking about the reasons why we incarnate, and we hear all the things like we're here to learn lessons, we're here to have experiences. And he said something I'd never heard before. He said, we're here to experience abandonment. I was like, I've never heard that. It's like, yeah, we want to know what it's like to be on our own. We want to, because in spirit, we don't experience that. And I thought about that, and I thought about like Jesus on the cross, for example, when he cried out, to his Father, why have you forsaken me? I think we come here to feel all those feelings, even the feeling of abandonment. So 3 basic ways to see your role in this world. One is solo, which is the way most of us perceive ourselves. I'm here, I'm on my own, I'm on a mission, it's an accident, whatever. But if I don't make it happen, no one's going to make it happen. It's up to me. That's the very Western mentality that's been drilled into us. Now, a lot of us, as we become more spiritual, we see ourselves as like, I'm the team leader. I'm the lead. I'm here to have this experience. I'm here to learn. And I've got this supporting cast all around me. I have spirit guides. I have guardian angels, but they're here to serve me. They're here to make sure that my journey is the best, whatever. But there's another way, and this is, again, I have to give full credit to Frankie and the team books. What if we're team members? What if we sat around with our council or whatever, and we said, I'm going to go in this time. I'm going to be the one that goes in. So you guys are going to be here to support me. Some of you are going to come in with me. You can come in. You'll be my wife. You'll be my daughter. But you're going to stay back, and you're going to be my guide this time. But next time around, I'm going to be the guide. And as we have these experiences, I think of it this way, is like when I go through the pain that I go through, I'm literally taking one for the team. Because when I go back and I share those experiences, then they don't have to go through them. They can do it vicariously through me. So we are collectively learning. We're collectively growing. We're not here to grow ourselves. We're here to grow our team. And our team grows the bigger team around them. And that grows all of consciousness. So we all have a duty, actually, a responsibility when we're here to grow as much as we can for the sake of the whole. And this is just a chart summarizing what I said, just said that the traditional view, your life is your own. It's up to you. There's the team leader view. You're here for personal growth and experience, but there's a team member view that we all share these experiences. We prepped with our team. Our team is always here to support us. And as we grow, the team grows. So again, just another little quick illustration that you're never alone. You out here, you're working as hard as you can, and you face plant. But there's always somebody here to pick you up. So we're never alone. We can really never fail. That's the great thing about it. I mean, we can't fail. We can maybe not do what we plan to do, but that's not a failure. Everything that we go through is an experience. Everything we go through, we can learn from. So what happens when we die? Well, the first view is that we're like a light bulb. Remember I talked about earlier, if you're a materialist, once our brain's gone, it's like turning off a light bulb. That's it, dark. There's nothing else. There's another view that we merge into the one. That once we go back, because we came from supreme consciousness, we go back into supreme consciousness, and we as individuals no longer exist. But the view I hold to is that there's actually this expansion of consciousness. It's like an explosion when we go back into spirit, that we do lose the ego. That we don't, we fear death because we fear the loss. And the only loss we really have is the ego. But the ego is here to serve us while we're here. The ego is what says, I'm separate from you. The ego is what says, I have to take care of my body. I don't want to step out in front of a bus. The ego is what allows us to set up boundaries. The ego is important. The ego gets a bad rap, but we lose the ego, but we do keep the sense of self. We do still remember who we are. Near-death experiences tell us this, and it's funny because even the ones that tell you that I merged into the one, they were still having an experience. So if they were still having an experience, then there was still some sense of I. Even though it may not have been in a body, there's some sense of being who you are. You go beyond your story. We get so tied up in our story that I'm like, I am Brian. I am Brian who was born in 1961 in Columbus, Ohio. And this is who I am. We go beyond that. We merge back with our team, and we retain access to the memories we picked up while we're here, but we also gain access to the collective consciousness. We gain access back to the collective consciousness of our team and even beyond that. That's why people will say, suddenly I knew everything, because I had access to everything. As we, as a species and as a race and as a whatever, as we all get this knowledge, it's shareable among all of us. And we have reunion with our greater self. Remember, I talked about that part of us that never incarnates. We're back. We're back in with that collective self. We're back with our other personalities that we've been in past lifetime, and we have reunion with our team. So death is a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful end of one thing and beginning of another. I want to talk a little bit more about the ego, because the ego is not who you are. The ego, it's also not a separate thing. With the ego, we're like, oh, the ego, we got to get rid of the ego. It's a bad thing. We need to kill it. It's necessary to live in a body. Every part of us is important. Egos help, as I said earlier, helps us protect our body. But once we no longer have a body, we no longer have a need for the ego. So we don't want to let the ego run our world, and we don't want to identify too closely with the body, but also we need to stop beating up on the ego. As I said, we have nothing to fear and we have everything to gain. Again, I make references to Christianity a lot. I hope I don't offend anybody with that. It's my tradition. It's what I grew up in. I don't identify as a Christian anymore, but I still think I know there's a lot of great stuff in the Bible and in it. But C.S. Lewis is one of my favorite authors, and I love this quote. He said, "It would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We were half-hearted creatures fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us, like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea. We are far too easily pleased." And this reminds me of something that Peter Panagore said, and you guys probably mostly know who he is. It's like living here is like living in the gutter when you have a mansion back home. So we fear death, and it's almost funny. I laugh when people go, I don't want to go to heaven. It sounds boring. Or is my loved one okay? Because, this is such a great place. And it's like everything here is a shadow of the other side. And Paul says, this is what the scriptures mean when they say, no eye is seen, no ear is heard, and no mind is imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. This is what near-death experiences tell us. They're like, man, you're not missing anything when you go home. You're gaining everything. This is the place of lack. This is the place of trouble. This is a place of hardship. And grief, I'm going to talk a little bit about grief. It feels like the end. It feels like we've been planted. And my brand is grief to growth, and it's my tagline is planet, not buried. Because when something is buried, it doesn't come back, right? We put something in the ground and we bury it. That's it. It's gone. But when we plant something, we're anticipating growth. And there's a verse in the Bible, Jesus said this, I assure you, I most solemnly say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. Just one grain and never more. But if it dies, it produces much grain and yields a harvest. Now, this happens not only when we physically die, but also when we go through a traumatic experience. When we go through a grief experience, it can be a growth experience. It feels like we have died, and in a sense we have. But we can grow from that, and we can produce much fruit. So when you can't pray, there's two things that you can remember. One is to pray, and one of my favorite verses in the Bible, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. When Jesus talking to the man about, do you believe? And you think about that prayer, it's pretty cool. Because he's saying, yeah, I want to believe, but I can't quite get there. Can you help me? And you can always pray help. You can always reach out to guides, loved ones, spirit, angels, God, universe, whatever it is you believe in, but you can always ask for help. So when it comes to prayer, Don't overcomplicate it. Don't, think I can't pray. These two prayers you can always say, right? Give me the faith, give me the strength, or just plain old help. So the old model of grief is that get over it. It's the move on. I remember when I first heard the phrase "move on" after my daughter passed away. It grates on me. It's like your person is gone. Get over it. Accept reality. Move on. They're dead and gone. That's the old model of grief. Your attachment is unhealthy. Don't talk to your loved one. Don't imagine seeing them again. Just get over it and move on. They treat grief like an addiction. In the DSM-5, they've actually called something called prolonged grief disorder. If you're in grief for too long, they call it a disorder. And there's actually been some research. They're trying to find a pill to cure grief because they're like, well, grief is it's like an addiction. An addiction is a thing of the brain. So if we can find a pill that will do the right, trigger the right chemicals, we can get people over their grief. Grief is not a disease. It's not something to be cured. Grief is, I had to put, grief is love with no place to go. But we do have a place to go with our love. And that's what actually mitigates our grief once we learn that. I already covered the DSM-5. The new model of grief, this is what I work with my clients on, it's called continuing bonds. That bond is never broken. That love is never broken. We all know the love never dies. So why would the bond ever die? As I said, my daughter's passed away 9 years ago. She was 15. She'd be 24 now. So talk to her every day. I plan to talk to her every day until I physically see her again. That love never dies, as I said. The relationship continues. We honor our loved ones by living full, healthy lives. When my daughter passed, I thought, one way I can honor her is just to be miserable for the rest of my life. I will prove how much I love her by, they'll say Brian was never the same. That's not what she wants. And you notice I didn't say what she would want. That's not what she wants. She wants me to be happy. She wants me to continue my life. She wants me to be productive. She wants to work with me. This team concept has changed my life because I'm like, she said, I'm going to go because I can work more efficiently on the other side. So I'm going to go early and I'm going to work with you from there. And it's kind of funny. I just said that. I was reminded, my wife used to say to her, Shayna, you're going to be famous one day. And we used to own a business, and our business had a story in Ebony magazine at one time. And we would teach Shayna about being famous. But now Shayna's name gets out all over the world. People, literally, there are people all over the world that know who my daughter is because she passed in the spirit early. So people ask me, does the grief get better? Does it get smaller? Does it shrink? I don't believe it does. I believe the grief kind of stays the same size. And that's the bad news, if you want to call it that. The good news is we get stronger. We get bigger. We have a bigger capacity. And that's the growth. So if you think about if you're carrying a weight, or you go to the gym and you're working out, and I go to the gym, I start working out with a 25-pound barbell. Well, the first it's going to be killing me. I'm going to be sore. It's going to be heavy. But as I go to the gym over the years, that weight doesn't get any lighter, but it feels lighter because I'm stronger. And that's what grief does. So I've already covered grief as a growth opportunity, but we can, whenever anything happens to us, we can look at it 3 different ways. We can gain knowledge from what happened to us, and this is not just death, but this is like losing a job. This is a divorce. This is whatever is unpleasant that happens to you. We can develop a new skill or strength. We may have to develop something to overcome what's happened to us. And we can use a tragedy to inspire us. So we call this, and I teach something called positive intelligence. We call these the three gifts. So anything that happens to you, 1, 2, or 3 of these can come out of it if you choose to look at it the right way. What have I learned from this? What can I learn from this? What new strength, what new skill am I going to develop with this? What am I going to do to take this to inspire me? People have started some amazing organizations after their loved ones have died. I've interviewed people on my podcast, and they're incredibly amazed by what people do. And this is a quote for one of my clients. She said, I don't see my grief as something to be overcome. It's more of a companion. My grief is a result of the love I still have for my fiance, and her fiance had passed in the spirit. We've been working together for a while, and I was so proud of her when she said this. She said, my grief will walk with me for the rest of my life as long as I love him. Now, this is not a death sentence. This is not a prison sentence. This is someone saying, I love this person. I will always love this person. And my grief is my companion. And I look at my grief and it's like, what can I learn from you? How can we work together? And I saw a thing David Kessler did an exercise with the woman, and at the beginning she was saying, I hate my grief because it causes me so much pain. We don't like the pain, of course, but by the end it's like, yeah, my grief is my companion. My grief is something that's here to teach me. We can hold on to this higher perspective. There are two wolves inside of each of us, and I'm going to try to wrap this up, so I don't want to tell you the long version of the story, but the two wolves inside of us, and they're fighting. And so one is like jealousy and anger and greed and fear and envy and all those things, and the other one's peace and hope and love and compassion. And the grandfather was telling the grandson the story, and the grandson says, well, which wolf wins? And the grandfather says, it's the one you feed. We can choose this perspective. We can choose to hold on to this perspective. We can feed this perspective. It's a choice. We don't have to just leave it up to chance. So we have inside of ourselves the sage, and we have what's called saboteurs. The sage says that you're worthy, that others are worthy, that every situation can be turned into a gift and opportunity, that you're never alone. But we have saboteurs also, the devil and angel inside of us. The saboteurs, you're not worthy. Others are they're all terrible too. You're not in a good situation. Everybody's got it better than you are. You'll be happy when, fill in the blank. You're alone. All these things, we all have these competing voices in our heads, and we can choose which ones we want to listen to. I do have a guide that helps with this. If anybody's interested, it's free. You can download it. So it's at my website, grieftogrowth.com/gems, GEMS. These are 4 practices that I discovered that I do every day. And just real quickly, it's gratitude, exercise, meditation or mindfulness, and sleep. And these are 4 things that you can literally start doing tomorrow to help lock in these things we're talking about. I think it's also really important to find your tribe. When we're going through grief, we'll lose people. Almost all of us lose somebody because they don't like, we make them feel sad, we make them feel uncomfortable. Maybe we become a spiritual person. They don't recognize who we are, whatever. So we're a lot of times we'll lose people. Some people lose even the people in their church. Some people lose people in their family. That's the not so good part of it. But the good part of it is surprising people may come into your life. When my daughter passed away, I had people who were longtime friends that I haven't talked to in 8 or 9 years at this point. But I also have people that I barely knew that are now my best friends. And we found something to go even deeper with. So while we don't want to lose people, and that sucks, people come into our life for a reason or for a season. And not everybody's meant to be in our life forever. So embrace the people that are your tribe, that are your community, and be open to that. And I'm going to make a real quick plug here. I do have a community group that I've just started. It's grieftogrowth.com/community, and that'll be in a later slide. But I'm trying to help, and you guys have your community here. So, stay with people that encourage you, people that speak your language, people that you can talk to about the deeper things of life. Social media can be a great place too. So I started this off with a story, and I started this off with the story of losing my job. And the reason I tell that story, there's an old Taoist story where this farmer finds a wild stallion. You probably heard it before, but he finds a wild stallion and he brings it in, and all the neighbors come up and say, that's a great thing. And the next day his son is out, he's breaking the stallion, and he falls off and he breaks his leg. And all the neighbors gather around. They said, that's a terrible thing. And then the next day the army comes through, and they're conscripting people in the army. And the son can't go because he's broken his legs. And all the neighbors come around and say, that's a great thing. And the farmer every time answers, maybe, or one version of the story, we'll see. So in the story I told you of losing my job, I think we'd probably all agree that losing your job when your daughter is 9 months old and your wife is staying at home, you're the sole breadwinner, it's not a good thing, right? I wasn't happy about it. I was angry. I called up a company I'd been working with. They were a reseller I was a partner with. And I said, you know what? I know you're opening a new branch in Cincinnati. I was living in Lexington. I was thinking about moving to Cincinnati. I was trying to get a transfer with this job, but it didn't work out. Are you looking for somebody? And it's the guy said, yes, we'd be glad to have you. So I started this job. I was 100% commission. I moved into the house that I live in now. I made 3 times as much money as I've been making before. And I would have never taken that job. I would have never taken that risk, that 100% commission job, if it hadn't been being forced on me by being fired. So the thing is, when something happens to you, wait, like the farmer, maybe, we'll see. When my daughter passed away, I could not see any possible good that could come of that. If my daughter hadn't passed, I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. So just wait and see what happens. So that was the rest of the story. I wanted to talk to you about, I know you guys have your own community. I am starting this community that's got resources in it, like-minded people. It's similar to Facebook, but it's off of Facebook. If you're interested in joining, it's free. You can go to my website, grief2growth.com/community. I also have, I don't know if I mentioned this, I have a podcast, Grief to Growth, and I have a book that I've written called Grief to Growth. It's all available through my website as well. So I do want to leave some time for questions. I think that was all I had for you for today. So with that, I'm going to stop presenting and open it up to questions.
Oh, Ryan, my God, you did such a great job. Thank you. Okay, questions, please. Questions? Okay, Jack, your sound is off.
Sorry, that was really a fantastic journey and great insights and observations. I wondered if you might take a few minutes just to tell us about your NDE.
I actually not had an NDE. I haven't had an NDE. I'm honored that IANDS allows me to speak with you guys. I've just studied it a lot. But one thing I will say really quickly, when I kind of smile because NDE means near death experience, and I was near my daughter's death, so it greatly impacted me. But I haven't had an out of body experience.
Jack, the flyer did say that he was a speaker at the IANDS conference, but never said that he had a near death experience. Did you read it?
No, I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah,
okay. I apologize.
A lot of people would assume that, but yeah, I have not.
Okay, let's see. Kathy, we can come back to you, Jack, later if you have another question. Kathy, please.
Yes, Brian, thank you so much. What a wonderful, wonderful presentation. And it was just so synchronistic for me because I just Friday, I met a man who almost identical, like his daughter died at a young age. I want to say she was a teenager about 30 years ago. And he too did the same thing. He just dove into near-death experiences and the afterlife. And I mean, the two of us we just could not stop talking. And so I was hoping that he'd be able to come and join us because I know he's going to, I mean, the two of you would just, I know you'd be instant friends. So I can't wait to share the video with him. And I just want to say how I loved the team member. I never heard of that. That's new for me. So I love that. I had an NDE when I was 5. So it certainly has so shaped my life. And so I just, much of what you presented here tonight was very familiar to me and just, but presented in a very, I love the way you presented it. It was very helpful. And what else did I want to say? Oh, my grief is my companion. That's beautiful because I was a hospice nurse for 40 years and grief counselor as well at times. And I agree, there's people will say, complicated grief. Well, that's really not true. I mean, people can still carry their loved one, talk to them every day, cry every day, and it's for years, and it's like it's their companion. It is their companion. So I love that. So
Yes.
I won't go on anymore, but give other people a chance. But thank you so much. It was a wonderful presentation, Brian.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you, Kathy. Okay, Glenn is next.
Hi, Brian. Yeah, wow, what a presentation. Thank you so much. So much there, so many wonderful things. You could talk for hours on many of those separate topics, I'm sure. My question, to be brief, is just, have you studied mediumship? Have you practiced that? Is that part of how you communicate and reach out to your daughter in any way? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, that's a good question. I have a lot of friends who are mediums. I've done some training. I don't have the ability to do mediumship the way some people do. I've had some interesting hits. What I've learned about communication with my daughter is to learn to trust that we all communicate different ways. So my daughter communicates to me a lot through signs and synchronicities, messing with my computer, coins, feathers, stuff like that, dreams. And I trust the voice that I hear within her. So I don't call it mediumship, I guess, because I don't do it with anybody else, but I talk to Shayna every day. And I do trust that the voice I hear from Shayna is Shayna.
Well, that's tremendous. Thank you. I just point out, I don't know if all the other thing, among all the other things that you work with, if you looked into doing a specific yoga type of things. I do that a lot. And there might be some practices in there that actually help to open that up a little bit.
Yeah.
Didn't know if you were familiar with that at all or whatever.
I'm not necessarily that. I've studied meditation, so I do a meditation practice on a regular basis, and the things I talk about in my GEMS guide, I think that those things help. I exercise. I walk an hour and 40 minutes every morning. That's kind of a walking meditation in addition to the regular meditation I practice I have. So I think for everybody, you have to find what works for you. I'm not trying to be a working medium, for example, but talking to my daughter every day.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you, Glenn. Catherine? Catherine, are you there? Oh, she must have stepped away. All right, we'll get back to Catherine, who's going to be our speaker for next month. Andre, you're next.
Well, first off, thank you for this great presentation that you gave today, Brian. This is confirming some things for me. My NDE, it was relatively recent. It was just in September, and I mentioned in the comments that I made a piece using similar colors to what you showed in your example in your presentation. And I know now that it's no coincidence that I choose that color palette when I paint things that are spiritual. I did a piece a long time ago that used the same colors, and it was spiritually themed, not based on an NDE, but along the same lines. And so I'm making connections in my own work now through that piece. You mentioned like having a team, right? A lot of folks talk about having the ancestors with them or talking to ancestors. And after having my own experience, I know now that they truly are with you because I felt them. In my NDE, I couldn't see anything. I felt it all. So I was surrounded by these auras, I guess. And so my question to you regarding your points about dark matter is it really dark, or are we just not allowed to see it?
Yeah, dark matter is just a term. And the reason I think they use the term is because we can't see it, right? So they call it dark. It doesn't mean that it's literally dark. Nobody knows. I just think it's really interesting that physicists have said, yeah, this stuff exists because we need it to balance our equations. Otherwise, the universe doesn't make any sense. But where is it? That's the thing. And sometimes I speculate, I'm like, is that the spirit world? Is that what we call the spirit world? Because I think that there's nothing that's truly supernatural. There's just what we don't understand yet.
Right.
If you think about radio waves, if you told somebody 300 years ago there's this thing called radio waves and we're going to have wireless communications, and they'd say that's crazy. That makes no sense. And now we just take it for granted.
Right.
So all the things that we can't see, they're just, I think, in another, they're not perceptible by our five senses. We're limited by these.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you done, Andre?
Yeah. Yeah. Looks
Okay,
like
thank
Catherine
you.
is still
Thank
here.
you. All right. Catherine is back.
Yeah, yes. Oh, I'm so sorry. Excuse me. I couldn't figure out how to unmute. I was doing it through my picture. But anyway, I'm here. So I wanted to say, Brian, thank you so much for your presentation and for sharing your journey with us. And wow, I just love everything that you had to share. And I just want to say thank you for your service to people that have had such tremendous loss in their life, and being an example of somebody who has turned that grief around into something bigger than what, like you showed the container that holds that grief, that grief that's always there, but your container just gets bigger and bigger. And I just loved how you described that. I just wanted to thank you. I really enjoyed your presentation.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so Willie Cancel is next.
Yeah, Brian, that was a great presentation. As a matter of fact, as you were presenting, I felt that what you were saying, I knew it already, but I didn't think about it. But it's almost as though you brought it out of me as you were talking. So what I would just like your opinion on is, do you think that this physical world is an illusion and the real world is the non-physical world?
Yeah, it's interesting because when we think about reality, it's like, how do we define what is reality? So some people call this world an illusion. Some people called it a dream. Scientists are now saying it might be holographic. Are we living in a computer simulation? But what does it mean for something to be real? It's something that we experience. So an analogy I like to use is like, when I'm dreaming at night, it's real. When I'm in the dream, it's real. And I actually sometimes have lucid dreams, and I'm like, wow, this is pretty cool. Look at that wall that I created. It looks so real. The sun, I can feel the sun. This is really cool. But when I wake up, I'm like, well, that was just a dream. So I think this reality that we're living in, compared to the next reality, is like a dream. It doesn't mean it's not real, though. The experiences are real. The pain is real. The love is real. So all that is real, but it's not real in the sense it's not the ultimate reality. And I think that the Matrix does a good job of showing that, right? When you're in the Matrix, you experience it as being real, even though it's just generated by a computer. So I don't like to say that this isn't real, because that's dismissive, and it's dismissive of people's experiences. It is real, but it's real in our minds.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Ryan?
Hey, everybody. This is my first meeting here, so I just want to say thanks for being here and for holding
Welcome.
this space. Brian, I really appreciate you presenting today, and I just also want to acknowledge you for taking such a challenging life experience, and you've created the blessing from that experience, and it was a choice that you have, and we're all benefiting from that. So thank you for doing that. I really resonated with a lot of what you said about perception, because I've had these thoughts a lot. Is like, even as a kid, I used to think like, okay, well, different animals have different senses than we do, and dogs can hear higher frequencies and sense things differently. So I kind of always thought about consciousness like as we're just a filter for consciousness, and it's cool to hear you kind of like basically say the same thing. A question that I have for you in regards to grief would be how have you taken the experience of grief from losing a loved one and kind of translated that into other forms of grief, you know, because we can experience loss in so many different ways. How have you kind of applied that in other forms of your life?
Yeah, that's a great question because what you said is very true. Grief is not only the loss of a loved one; it's loss of anything that we didn't want to lose. So it could be the loss of a job, it could be the loss of our health, it could be the loss of a spouse through divorce. It could be actually sometimes even your children growing up and moving out of the house, you know, people with empty houses. So there's a lot of losses in life. And these principles apply to all of those losses, the positive intelligence principles I talked about. How do I take this perceived loss and figure out how to make a gain out of it? And I appreciate what you said about me creating a blessing for my daughter's passing, because the gifts don't come on their own. They're not automatic. They're people that choose not to make that leap. So it's a choice that we make. And so when you start to apply these principles, it's easier to apply them to, like, when I lost my job, right? For example, now at the time I was devastated, but now I know, okay, well, let's wait and see what happens. The loss of a person, that's the big one, right? That's the one that we say, well, there's no coming back from this. I can't replace them. I'm never going to see them again. So that's the one that's really challenging. So if we can start to apply these principles to small things in our life, when the big things come along, it's easier to apply to those.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Bethany?
Yes, thank you so much, Brian. You are like a giant to me in terms of the things that you've overcome. It's really amazing. And my research area, my area of interest is in integration after the near-death experience. So, you know, after you tell your story, you have to keep living your life, right? And one of the things that it's similar to Ryan's question, really, but he was very eloquent. I'll try to get to the eloquent part. But I wondered about the catalyst for you to take something so rattling and painful, such as, you know, the loss of your beautiful daughter or the loss of a job. What is the catalyst that helps you kind of get over the top of that grief wave? Like to say, I'm gonna swim. I'm gonna, you know, what is it inside of you that says, that uses this to look at it as a strength building opportunity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And wow, the answer would be very long. So I'll see if I could summarize it a little bit, I guess. I believe, first of all, I think our lives set us up for what we're supposed to do. So all the things that have happened in my life, even my religious background, the fear that I had when I was young, that drove me to study the afterlife. Okay. And then when my daughter passed, I had that knowledge. And then when she passed, I was like, okay, I don't want to be here. I mean, frankly, I don't want to be here. And I don't like to talk about that, because I know some people don't like to talk about stuff like that. But it wasn't that I was suicidal. I've talked to a lot of parents that told me they feel the same way. It's like, it's not like you're suicidal. It's like you just don't care. It's just like, I just want the pain to stop. I don't want to be here. But I looked at my wife and my daughter and other people that rely on me, but primarily starting with those two. And it's like, I have to be there. I have to be here for them. I have to show up for them. And that gets back into that team concept, right? It's not about me. So I guess the biggest thing I would say right now, if I was going to try to answer a little bit more succinctly, is the fact that I have a responsibility, that we all have responsibilities to each other. And that I believe that my life was set up this way for a reason, for me to be doing what I'm doing. My grandfather being a pastor, my grandfather was a great role model for me. And it's really wild, because my first medium reading, the woman that was reading with it was Suzanne Wilson. I think she wouldn't mind if I said her name. but her grandfather was a pastor. And with something we had in common, and she said, "Your grandfather is so proud of you," which was really wild because he was straight up Pentecostal. He would have never talked to a medium. But I think when we cross over, we get that expansion of knowledge, right?
Yeah, clarity.
So to me, it's a legacy. It's something that I have to do.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah. I just, I read the book Slumdog Millionaire. I read the actual book of that. And I think, just to kind of validate what you're saying, in that book, this young boy in India has these life experiences, and the 5 questions that he gets on the game show are actually directly linked to these 5 life experiences that he had. And the test at the end, to win the big, I don't know, grand prize for that, is really to make great use of the lessons that come before the real test.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you very much, Brian.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bethany. Rebecca, you're on. Rebecca, are you there? I guess. Oh, okay. Can't unmute. Oh. Bethany, can you help her? No.
We're not able to unmute people. We can only mute them.
Okay. So Rebecca, if you want to place your question, write it down, and we'll see it that way.
Yeah, you can put it in the chat, Rebecca.
Thank you. Okay, anyone else in the meantime? David, did you still have your question?
Oh, it might help Rebecca to know that if she presses the red microphone on the bottom, that will unmute her, because I was trying to go to the top microphone on my picture.
Oh, yeah.
That's how you do it on Zoom. So sometimes people might get confused.
Okay. Well, I'm sure she'll let us know. So, David, did you still have a question?
Not so much questions as a comment. I just wanted to say thank you, Brian, for the things you said. So much of it was right in alignment with what I believe in my, from my ND research and all that. Right down to the dark matter and dark energy. I heard from heaven that, we got the 4 forces: strong nuclear, weak nuclear, electromagnetic, and gravity. And there are 2 more forces, both quantum and multidimensional in nature, that we don't know about yet. So that may be the dark matter, dark energy that they're talking about in science. I don't know. And then experiencing abandonment. Wow. I haven't heard it from too many NDEs, but the idea I've heard is that in order for the love of heaven to exist, and I wanted your take on this, because I've only heard it from a few near-death experiences. In order for the love of heaven to exist, a small part of creation has to experience the opposite. And that is how consciousness grows, through contrast. And one woman was even told that if it weren't for the work that souls do incarnating into physical lives and experiencing the illusion of separateness and the opposite of love, fear, the creation process could not continue. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. There has to be contrast for us to experience anything. You can't experience hot unless there's cold. You can't experience anything without something to compare it against. Otherwise, it's basically nothing. And the Earth, I've heard, is one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult venue, and it's one with the most contrast and the most free will. So people can do crazy things here. But because of that, we also grow tremendously, because again, it's like the lifting weights analogy, right? If you're lifting light weights, you're never going to get any stronger. You get stronger by lifting heavier weights. And I was told by a guy who remembers being a Pleiadian. He said, when you come to the Earth venue, you can grow more here in 10 or 15 minutes than you can in some environments in 10,000 years, because you don't have anything to push back against. There's no contrast. So when we think about our lives here, think about the people that we admire the most. It's typically the people that have been through the most crap, right? Those are people that have they're showing their character, and they're also developing their character. So yeah, I don't view what we go through here. It's not a bug. It's a feature. It's built into the system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I heard that as well about Earth. I heard it was the hardest planet in this galaxy to have a life, and the third hardest in the universe. So tough place.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, duality is part of the Earth experience for sure. So, Rebecca, are you ready? Okay, thank you.
Hi.
Go ahead.
Hi, Brian. Hi, everybody. I just wanted to thank you for sharing your story, because in all of that science and engineer brain of yours, which I am fascinated by engineers' brains, and that's a compliment. They are very, very, they're amazing. They're very unique. So I thank you for that. I love listening to those. I love listening to everybody, but I wanted to say thank you for sharing your story and to express my, sympathy, basic sympathy, this meat flesh, that covers what I call my soul, my spirit, the whatever other part of me. It doesn't even matter what its label is in my world anymore. Just, that's just it's a huge loss. But I like how you said that, out of everything, out of that, positive things have come from it. And you've shared that here tonight. And I'm really grateful and happy that you have that. And any of us have that. And I hear it. I'm so fascinated since my experiences in my life. And I have a friend whose husband's child just shot himself in the head. And you hear I was also raised the same way you were with religion, terrified. But there was always this thing in me that has stayed with me my entire life, which I never thought I would have a near-death experience. I didn't buy into it. I never bought into it, no matter who told me what. Yeah, my dad gave me a great definition of where my grandmother went, and who wouldn't love to hear something so wonderful and joyous and beautiful. But I've also heard people share that their experience wasn't so great, and it wasn't a very pleasant experience. So I appreciate, just I guess what I'm going to say from what you've shared, your vast diverse possibilities, because really the ultimate truth is we don't know. All we know is what we know. All we know is what our experience is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. And we can and whatever that is maybe that's what we're meant to know. Maybe that's what we're meant to share. My son and my daughter have the same thing I have, and they're terrified of it. They're terrified, to the point where my daughter suffered such severe panic attacks, as you were sharing, that she had to go to counseling. We couldn't talk about anything in the house until one night. I'll share this and I'll leave it at that. Until, for months, I had this woman standing next to my bed. I couldn't see her. I didn't look at her. I had yet to see a physical manifestation of a as I heard someone call these meat suits. I like that term kind of right now. These meat suits. That was not. So I would just roll over to my husband, who, and I would just go, oh God, no, just there's a light. I was told there's a light. Go to that light. Go look at that light. And I would not turn over. And it went on for months. And she would just stand next to my bed and watch me. And I was more afraid of looking because I didn't know what I would see. But anyway, one morning, my daughter came up from the basement, this beautiful room that was built down there. And she said, this daughter that was in, receiving treatment for her disorder, like it was named a disorder, as you shared. And she came into the kitchen and she said, so for the last couple of months, there's been this lady standing. I get the feeling there's a lady standing in my room watching me sleep.
Hmm.
And I was like, all right, I'm talking now. And I think for each of us, like what I've learned from your share, what I learned from every person I encounter on this planet, alcoholics, drug addicts, I've been blessed to be part of a 12-step program. Some of the best human beings I've ever met, spirits and souls, most generous, kind, compassionate. Others would consider them the dregs of society. But I did open my mouth and I said, yeah, we're either having, picking up on each other's experience, or it's happening to both of us, or something else we don't know. And she kind of just started to calm down. She got the gift of seeing a beautiful green field. And she came up so excited. While she was sleeping, she saw the green field. So in my near-death experience, I was told that my daughter, which I already knew, my daughter and my son have this gift. And that is why they're so unhappy, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are fighting it. And please pardon my definition. They say it's kind of like having to pass a little gas, but you're holding it in. You're just not releasing it. I think the reason that we get to share these things is we all are a team. Forget just the team that I think we chose, that we kind of travel with wherever that higher consciousness is. And then my question, I'll go one step before that. What created that higher consciousness? What created that ultimate consciousness? And then what created that ultimate consciousness? I mean, infinity. I can go backwards. What created? So for me, I had to stop asking why, because I just get the information as it comes, and I'm much more peaceful now. Just accepting whatever today is going to bring. I do communicate with my father. He was my favorite human being on the planet aside from my children. I never knew what the feeling of grief felt like. So yeah, I just wanted to really say I'm sorry for your loss, because it's still a loss. I think we learn to just live with it, carry it with us, and love it. And communicate in a different fashion, as you shared, which is an amazing gift in itself. So yeah, I'm really grateful for this support group and all of our experiences. And again, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I guess we're way over our time, but Glenn has his hand up, and I just want to say thank you, Brian. When Bethany has her video ready, she will send it to you. Thank you again for your presentation. And I guess anybody that wants to stay and still chit chat, go ahead and do so. Glenn?
Hi, yeah, it's late. I'll be real quick. Thank you for letting me do this, ask another question. I'm just curious, with all the breadth of stuff you studied, I'm just so excited about some of the stuff, like quoting C.S. Lewis, one of my favorite guys. And so many great things to say. But I guess what I wanted to bring out was that in the themes of religion, oftentimes you do find, the redemption story. Let's to put it quickly. And sometimes we think that we get away from that because we think that was a naive position. But as you meditate upon the different scriptures, the Hindu scriptures, Christian scriptures, maybe some of those I'm more familiar with than others, but the main point here, what I'm trying to get to asking is, have you ever heard it put this way? That's kind of a background to say that, and this is really important to me, a point, and I'm wondering if you have come across this. I heard someone recently, and I'd like to be able to dig it back up where I got it from, but it was like, say, the spirit is the light of the world, love is the light of the world, and then they say, well, redeemed darkness is the light of the light. I wonder if you come across that kind of thing. It ties into some essence of the redemption story in the foundations of religion, along with the idea of the ongoing creative process. What do you
there's a lot. When it comes to redemption, I think from what I've understood, there are very few religions that talk about, like, for example, being saved, like Christianity does, that we are lost and we have to be saved. Now there's a journey, there's a hero's journey. There's even Jesus talked about the prodigal son, you know, so we are kind of like the prodigal sons, right? We've gone out and we're having this experience and we will return back. So I definitely believe that there's a journey where obviously there's a journey, there's obviously growth. But in terms of being saved and light and dark, I mean, all dark isn't a real thing. Dark is the absence of light. It's not a thing. It's a lack of a thing. So we get to experience darkness, but there, you know, and I love the ways to put, you know, you can't carry a lantern into a room, an unlit lantern, and the room gets dark, right? You carry a lit lantern and the room gets light, but it doesn't work the other way around. So I totally do not believe that anybody is ever lost eternally. But we can go on journeys. We can have less light. We can choose to have less light. We can choose to have those experiences. And I think that's very clear that happens. But in terms of redemption, I'm not a big believer in it. Someone earlier brought up Genesis, and again, as a Christian, I was taught, oh, that's the original sin, and that's where Adam and Eve were kicked out, and they were removed from God. And I was talking to a Jewish friend of mine. This is back when I was a total evangelical Christian apologist and everything. And he goes, "That's not the way Jews view it. That was a choice of people coming into the world to have this experience. That was a choice of being physical. It's not a punishment. It was like we talked earlier. The pain of this earth is built in. It's a growth opportunity. So God wasn't cursing people. It's like, this is what you've chosen to experience, so you're going to go through it. So there is that. I think in the earth, I was talking to someone earlier today, we have lost our way in very many ways, and I know there are guides that are concerned, and they're doing things to help us. So there's that process. So I believe all of that, but I don't believe that that we're ever truly lost.
Thank you.
These are great questions. I'm going to stop the recording so that we can bring closure to the video. But as we usually